Greetings. How's everyone doing? Oh, that's great, you answered. Oh, this is already going fantastic. All right. So the evolution of innovation, how new ideas will shape specialty coffee's future. Whew. This is a little nerve-wracking. Let's get rolling, let's do it. All right. So the word innovation is actually just about as old as coffee's recorded history itself. It was coined somewhere between 1540 and 1550, and it's from the Latin word to renew, to alter. The word itself embodies that definition. It's not about creating something out of thin air, but about taking something that already exists, like the Latin word innovare, and making it better, improving it. Fundamentally, I think that's what specialty coffee is about. I don't think anyone in this room would claim that we invented coffee, but I think all of us are trying to constantly renew, alter, and improve it, to challenge it and to challenge ourselves in the process. However, even within our industry-wide history as movers and shakers, and our commitment to progress in coffee science, quality, marketing, accessibility, all of these things that we want to improve, even just appreciation of coffee in general, we're kind of odd. We're kind of an odd bunch. I don't think anyone would disagree with the fact that everyone in this room probably is a little bit weird. For all of our talk of these better systems that we're seeking, better husbandry, improved scientific understanding, more market access, better payment for small producers, we all still revere tradition, what some people might call doing things the hard way. In a lot of times, in a lot of situations, this kind of reverence that we have for tradition, I think can be somewhat self-defeating. If you'll allow me an example. We get really wrapped up in talk about the latest, most high-tech advancement in espresso machine technology, right? We want all these bells and whistles on our espresso machines. We want built-in scales and timers and auto-volumetric controls and pressure profiling, access to recipes that are stored on the cloud. And yet, in order to source the coffee that we actually put through those espresso machines, we use sensory methodology that was developed in the 19th century and has hardly changed since it was invented. Yeah, I'm talking about cupping. Like, when's the last time you heard anyone think critically and evaluate the process that we use that's one of the most fundamental tools for the industry? Have we ever really gotten together as an industry to improve it, to alter it, and to renew it? I think that, it's that thought that will drive us as we go forward and think about innovation. Just think about the fact that we call cupping a ritual. Should that word alone protect it from being improved? So that's what we're talking about in this session. Improvement, renewal, radical disruption of the status quo, even our status quo. There's no such thing as too much better, so why should we ever stop looking? What if specialty coffee could be a zero-waste industry? What if we could use instant coffee technology to make sensory analysis more accessible at origin? What if we were actively looking for climate-adapted regions to grow coffee in consuming countries? What if literally anyone on Earth could roast coffee, the best coffee, and roast it with zero emissions? What if we radically altered transparency in order to create real-time financial records that could be checked and double-checked to strengthen the supply chain? As we'll hear, all of these ideas, all of these innovations are more possible now than they probably have ever been before. So joining me on stage for a roundtable discussion about how innovation will shape specialty coffee's future are three more innovators who are doing just that, identifying problems and opening up a world of solutions simply by taking what we already know and making it different, changing it, reimagining it. This is where I'll pause for just a moment, just to I'm going off script. Hey. And save this one for the blooper reel. I will sort of say that there can be a little bit of an anxiety, especially in a room like this when we're talking about innovative products. And you sort of feel like, well, why is this person's product being featured on stage, or why is that person's product being featured on stage? And I want to take a moment to remind everyone in this room that we are all working together to sell one thing. We all work in coffee. Every single person in this room, in this whole weekend's worth of events, we're all brought together because we want to sell better coffee, we want to sell coffee better, and so we're all sort of united under this one big umbrella. Every single person in this room does that a different way, with a different product, with a different approach. So the people who are here on stage are not necessarily pushing their products, but pushing the ideology of innovation and different ways that we can approach all of us doing that work together. So I just wanted to sort of offer that slight deviation from my really just wonderful script, right? Like Oscar-winning script writing. Just to sort of give that little disclaimer, I guess, before we get started. So I'm going to call up my 3 roundtable panelists here. The first is Arno Holschuh. He's the COO of Bellwether Coffee, which is a company that does more than simply make zero-emission coffee roasting machines that are easy enough for anybody to use, though that would be enough. Arno. That's the cue. There we go. Hello, welcome. Thanks. Next up, we have Umeko Motoyoshi. She's the VP for Product of Sudden Coffee, which is a specialty instant coffee brand that's transformed the image of soluble products and the potential to break through countless barriers to make coffee more accessible to customers around the world. Let's hear it for Umeko. And lastly, we've got Jay Ruskey. He's the owner and farmer at Good Land Organics, which is the first commercial coffee farm in the continental United States. And he's the co-founder and CEO of Frinj Coffee, which is an organization determined to develop and support a network of coffee farmers in California. And you're still stuck with me. I'm going to go over here, though. Oh, thanks. That's very kind. So we're going to talk about innovation, and I'm being so innovative that I actually have my questions printed out on a piece of paper. I probably wrote this in Microsoft Word, so real innovative. All right. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
So the other thing about the sort of hosting a roundtable and having a panel is that I find that the best panels are actually when you have a conversation. So I will hopefully be asking questions that I would love for you to answer, but I don't want this to be one of those panels where you necessarily would go down the line, everyone sort of answers. I would like you to also feel like you can ask each other questions, or even ask questions of the audience, anything that sort of makes this feel a little bit more like a conversation and a little bit less like a game show in the 1950s. Does that sound okay? Is everyone all right with that? You can be on board? Okay. So obviously you 3 have very different focuses in your work. You work on very different aspects of the supply chain, and the products that you're working with and the people that you're working with are all sort of different and diverse. But I feel like there's a lot of ideological overlap in the things that you focus on and the innovations that you're sort of taking on. So I'd like to ask a question about sort of redesigning and disrupting that sort of status quo, specifically looking at accessibility to begin. Accessibility is something that really struck me when I was listening to Freedom's talk about the idea that the sleeve itself is so small. It's such a small change. The price point is really low. It's a very small sort of habitual buy-in that people can take on. It's something that you really have a hard time finding someone who couldn't be convinced that it's something that they could do. And accessibility means obviously a lot of things to a lot of people. Is something accessible in terms of price point? Is it accessible in terms of the amount of skill or education or expertise you need to have to operate it? So I guess I kind of want to ask what accessibility means to you in terms of the innovation that you're doing, and if you want to talk a little about how that has impacted your approach or impacted your sensibilities about coffee. Is that, we okay with
that?
Okay.
Great. Yeah. That's great. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. Great.
Yeah. I mean, I would say I look back to my earlier days, my beginning days in the industry, and we had a self-image at least at that time, and I think to some degree it was borne out by reality, that the specialty coffee industry was a safe place to go and a safe place to have a career if you did not otherwise fit into the economy as it stood at that time. You know, we used to joke that we were the revenge of the liberal arts majors. I've heard other people, and we used to refer to us as the island of broken toys. And that was a really cool thing, and I think that that was, first of all, that was sort of really beneficial to the people who could access that pathway, and so it was good for that part of society. But beyond that, it made our industry really dynamic because we were willing to think outside the box, and we weren't going to do things the way that other people had done them. And what's happened as we've professionalized as an industry, and as we've really normalized into a more traditional sort of late capitalist model in many places in our industry, though that easy access for people who do not otherwise fit in has been barred. If you want to start roasting coffee, to talk about what we're doing, there's a capital requirement, which is quite severe. If you go out and you look for capital as a specialty coffee business, the going rate is about 7%. So because we are high-risk businesses. And that's quite a burden to bear. It's going to take you a long time to pay off that roastery if you want to do it. It's much better just to buy from somebody else who's already roasting coffee. That's the more economic decision to make. If you were able to get the money, you'd have the skills acquisition piece, not just around roasting, but also around inventory control, inbound supply chain, outbound supply chain, green coffee buying. Like, we all know what we do for a living here, right? And I think that innovation really can bring us back to a place that allows people in. New people who haven't had access, while preserving the quality of our product and actually preserving the craft that we hold so dear. So I know it's a balance here about to what degree we should be promoting our own products, so I will try not to stray too far on that side of the line, but what we have tried to do with our technology is create something that tears down all of the barriers to entry, including that you need not purchase it, you can sort of access it with a monthly fee. It's a little bit easier for people to swallow when they're just getting into business. You don't have to know how to roast, you don't have to know how to buy green coffee, although all of that is open as well, and we welcome those activities as well, because we view coffee roasting and sort of seen in a broader context, coffee production, everything that happens inside the production department or the roastery, that's like a really, really good economic activity that we have built a ton of barriers around. And so, yeah, we think about ourselves as the pathway in for others.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, really great.
Yeah, that was great. So after you have your roastery set up and you're roasting coffee and you're looking for your customers, right, and for your market, and that can be a tough place to be when you're in specialty coffee. It's still not exactly a product that's totally understood, and there are still a lot of questions around the price point, questions around, okay, well, do I need to buy a $500 grinder, and do I need to buy into an entire ideology? Is that what I need to do in order to drink nice coffee? So what Sudden really is excited about is being able to help specialty coffee companies extend that reach in a lot more of an easy and kind of just fun way. So when you have your customers who they aren't familiar yet with specialty coffee, it's such an easy way to get familiar, and you can't mess it up. You just add water to it. It's an instant coffee, and it's a really nice way, I think, for specialty coffee companies to be able to reach new people. And then the accessibility also works for the customers as well, and I really enjoy that about what we do. And Arno was talking about also the barriers to entry for roasting, and that for me also brought up So I've worked in specialty coffee for about 10 years. I've seen the industry change a lot. And when I started working in coffee, it was pretty easy for people to get in when they belong to a very specific demographic. You could get hired, and then for being promoted and moving up, there's like the demographic narrows even more, and kind of for no good reason. There's no grounds for that.
Coffee pun.
So
Oh, those are allowed. Great.
Yeah, no,
Cool.
that's on the table.
Good.
So that's something that I care about a lot, is making sure that that just jobs in specialty coffee are accessible to people from all demographics. I think that's so vital and so crucial, and that's something that I really enjoy about my team, is we have such a diverse range of perspectives, and we're able to learn so much from each other because everyone's coming from like this really different experience, and creating that accessibility as well is something I feel really excited about.
Yeah, there's so many different ways of interpreting that word, I think, and what it means. And I think it's something that we're all really striving toward. And I think access to like a growing opportunity, actually, as producers too. I mean, it's amazing the sort of the kind of symbiotic relationship that you three sort of represent, And I would love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we all share in common right now, at least at the consumer level, is we're trying to create accessibility to quality. And that's one of three components to what we've been working on. When I look at accessibility, it's really at three levels. We have accessibility for our farmers to get quality plant material and a new market. Because I'm working with farmers in California, avocado farmers who have a lot of pressures in production, and they are looking for accessibility in markets that are growing, and where we have a perennial crop that needs a 10-year, 20-year growth, so trying to provide accessibility to markets. And then finally, one part that I've always worked on was the marketing. I did farmers market for 22 years. Introducing exotic fruits, so allowing the consumer to have an experience of trying something new, and then the customer coming back to the farmer, having a connection, is something I'm trying to put back into play here. So accessibility needs to be applied to all parts of this really complex supply chain that we have, and it goes all the way to the end consumer, because if we can take the experience that you two are doing to gain the consumer to willing to pay a few bucks more, and to highlight all the farmer's work, and if we can bring it all the way back to the farmer, then the farmer has accessibilities to better markets and hopefully a better return and a better future.
Yeah, that when you sort of started talking and you say all of us are working toward that accessibility of quality, right? Access to quality. And I was immediately thinking about how the loop of the work that the three of you are doing, and the way that innovation will make this sort of accessibility happen is kind of amazing, even if you just kind of imagine a producer grows coffee in a place where maybe they're not familiar with growing coffee, so there's a learning curve there, right? So you have to you're kind of guessing at what quality is. How are we going to make quality in this place where there is no precedent? You can give that end product to a company where someone can roast that, almost immediately roast it, and offer, and then create instant coffee with it. So the barrier to access for sensory analysis is basically eliminated. What if we could, be roasting at a cupping level and making instant coffee that sort of simulates the sensory analysis experience without necessarily sort of going through all of the hoops of doing that, and then bringing that right back into a circle. So it's kind of amazing when you think about the ways that innovations feed off of each other, and the ways that they make new growth and technology, possible. So I think that is really interesting. And that sort of brings up to one of the other themes that we were sort of developing when we kind of came together with this session, which is our kind of knee-jerk response to change and to innovation, and the ways that we tend, maybe it's a human response, tend to push back. Even though we want things to change, when they sort of start to change, you kind of flinch. And as I've been listening to everyone speak, and as I've gotten to know you all, I also have had to check my own knee-jerk reactions in a lot of cases. And sort of, I mean, here I am reading off of a paper. I don't even have an iPhone with me. Do you think that do you think that you have a particular approach or response to when you're speaking to someone who you can sort of feel them close off, or you can feel their skepticism? What kind of approach do you take when you're trying to help someone overcome their progressive phobia, I guess, is the...
What I've found is listening more than talking or more than explaining is really helpful for me. I really empathize with that kind of feeling of being, feeling perhaps challenged, or feeling like you found a way to make your business work that you like and that's been successful. And when there's someone doing something different, sometimes it can feel like it's a challenge to your model, or a challenge to what you've accomplished. And I really empathize with that, and I like to really just listen and hear that. And from my perspective, it's been helpful to just share where we're really coming from, which is we love cafes, we love specialty coffee. We're asked a lot if we're trying to replace cafes, or if we're trying to replace baristas, or that kind of thing. And I get why people ask that, and we love cafes and want to extend the reach of cafes. And I've worked in specialty coffee, in the traditional kind of specialty coffee, for 12 years now, and I love it, and I want to make that more accessible and approachable for more people, because I think it's such a wonderful thing to share. So that's what that's where I'm coming from, and I like to just listen and be like, yeah, I hear you. I've felt like that a lot in my life about different things that come up, and I've seen that there, like you were saying, there's been this really great kind of synergistic, excuse my buzzwords from the 90s.
Hashtag synergistic.
Yeah. There's been this really, synergistic path forward, but also just like this expansion. That's really neat.
Yeah. You also probably have the benefit of having someone go, instant coffee, and then you make it for them, and it's like, like a commercial.
Right.
Like one of those early morning infomercials.
Right. But whenever I make the coffee for someone who is not familiar with specialty coffee, they'll be like, this is really, this tastes like a hot fruit juice. This is really weird. This is like a light roast. And I'm like, yeah, but also it's instant coffee, and you didn't notice that. So that's always a fun thing.
Hashtag hot fruit juice.
Yeah, it's totally they fixate first on this is a different kind of coffee than I'm used to drinking, because of the flavor profile of a light roasted kind of, specialty coffee.
You probably come up against a lot of that too, where it's people coffee from California,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like what you went through. Is people will have this this ingrained concept that instant coffee is going to taste like this, and you're way over here. And so that's a big reach for you. But I think you as a person and your founders have this certain personality that once you get to the point where you're sure it's going to happen, there's a tenacity. And so you get a little bit resilient to that once you're confident and you see the vision going forward. Because I spent 10 years growing coffee in the closet quietly, just a few trees.
Not literally
Not really
in the
coming
closet.
out. And then I was really nervous because okay, we're going to get these cupped finally, and then we got great scores on the table, and then I took a further step out, and then we more pushback, and then we started opening up tours on the farm because people thought I was growing them in a greenhouse, and they didn't know we were growing with avocados on the hillsides. And so so the progressive phobia had different layers to it that I didn't see. But one thing that I have noticed in the last few years of attending the symposium, a lot of the players that are really, quote, innovators that are coming in from other avenues.
Yeah.
And I think this stems from, we are really an agricultural product. And there's a lot of farming around, and farming has tradition. And then there's tradition and systems that are almost centuries old that went all the way to the consumer. And so now we have forums like this where we're bringing other people in to give this outside perspective to things. And I think that's helping. I see this progressive phobia begin to break down. And I still see room for all of us to attack it, all the way down to the roasting machines and even the delivery system. So it's really a fascinating time in the whole coffee industry, not just specialty coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that a bit like Umeko, I start with empathy because I am a nostalgist. Like, I own a 35-year-old pickup truck that's my pride and joy, and I listen to old-time radio theater, which does not get much more dorky than that. I love a lot of the past, but I think that we in our society are at a place where we really need to understand the appropriate role for nostalgia, and it is not the guiding light of our business practices or our production modalities, because that 35-year-old pickup truck that I have is, it was really fuel efficient for its time, but it is no longer the best truck on the road. And so I don't drive it every day, right? I have it, I love it, I like to work on it, and I think that that is really sort of where nostalgia belongs. It's a thing to enjoy. It's a thing to learn from. And then, after I've had that moment of empathy with people, I'm like, okay, let's have a debate on the merits, right? And I think that debate, I'm willing to have that debate because if you look at other things that were held dear in history that were beautiful in their own right, but weren't really appropriate for the time. I like to use the example of the illuminated manuscript. It's like, if you were making illuminated manuscripts, you probably thought that they were the cat's meow, and in fact, they were totally beautiful. But when the printing press came along, it was a huge democratization in terms of the dissemination of knowledge, of ideology. It allowed for a very different debate that ended up with the Enlightenment in Europe. And that is really where, we don't see ourselves as necessarily Gutenberg printing press, but we do think that we're the sort of technology that allows us to do what we want to do, but do it in a way that is more appropriate for the times we live in. Somebody brought up the notion of cognitive dissonance yesterday, and that rings very true for me. When people are talking about the impacts of climate change on coffee farmers and trying to say that these coffee farmers are in fact equal partners in our industry and that we don't just ride on their backs. And then they go back to their roasteries and they fire up an old open flame drum roaster with cast iron plates fore and aft, with a giant afterburner on it, and then they roast their coffee, and in order for it to be delivered fresh to their cafes, they have this kind of very this very spendy in terms of gasoline delivery route that the driver has to run in the morning, and everything has to be done in this way because quality is the only thing we care about. I'm sort of like, you could have that quality without all of these other trappings around it. And so you need to question for yourself, was it the high quality coffee you wanted, or was it the imagery of high quality coffee as it is derived from the past?
Wow. And that, I think, speaks to everyone on this panel, too. It's like, is it the high-quality coffee do you want, or the theater of making it?
Right.
Is it the high-quality coffee that you want, or the origin story that we've all told 100 times that's super problematic, and we could be growing coffee in our own country. I think that is an incredible thread to sort of take away from that, I'm just going to sit with that for a second. I'm just going to have a feeling. I'm just going to let a feeling wash over wash over me here on stage. Wow. Okay. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, and that raises this sort of point for me, and Freedom's talk calls to this, and some of the discussions that we'll have later on today, I think we'll talk about this. But we kind of focus on the idea of waste. And I think that everyone is really focused on eliminating waste wherever possible. And one of the ways that we sort of really focus on waste reduction is with tangible things like renewable or non-renewable resources, pollution, energy. But I think we also can think about waste reduction in terms of people power. How much are we wasting of either physical or emotional or intellectual resources? And so I kind of want to ask a question about where waste reduction or where efficiency kind of fits into what you do. And again, this is another thing that has interpretations on multiple levels. And so I'm really curious if that's a consideration and where you think that falls into your work.
Well, I like to somehow add a monetary value to waste. And for example, in California, water. You know, there's a really defined value on what we do with water. Every drop counts, how you use it, how you reuse it, how making sure when it's being used, it's used in the right chemistry, in fact, for the trees. So that's kind of where we are trying to make a difference. And we're working with like avocado growers who have been there for 30 years. And it's been really surprising to see some of the inefficiencies that are built into their system. And there are rather simple technologies, like sensors. Like everybody knows when to turn water on, but people struggle to know when to turn water off because you can't see it. You just kind of look at the trees and there's a delayed response in the canopies. But by taking these sensors that are readily available and rather cost effective and showing the farmers the difference, and it takes really a whole season to show that difference and do a monetary change. We can get farmers to use 30 to 40% less water because they're just using it a little more efficiently and the innovation's a little more friendly finally. So that's one example, but you really have to like put a money value to it. And I think some of the waste that we encounter, we have such a streamlined disposal process that it's hard for us to gauge that value. So you'll see a lot of conservation efforts around the world where people are trying to monetize it and make it feel not only like they're wasting money, but there's a benefit to them financially in the future to conserve water so they can farm next year. Or the fisheries are great examples. People are now privatizing fisheries successfully because they're giving the ownership to the farmer or the fisherman, who is really the farmer, who protected their fisheries and follows rules. So from a global perspective, I see that as a pretty good paradigm of successful conservation efforts.
Yeah, I would say too, I think that the notion of growing coffee closer to where it is consumed, it was referenced yesterday in terms of building domestic markets in what we traditionally refer to as countries of origin, right? Maybe it's time to rethink them as also countries of consumption. And that here too would reduce the food miles for our coffee. Yeah. So which is never to say that we should displace what's coming, but I think that your approach to farming has other ways of reducing waste.
Yeah, well, I do think that like one thing that aspect of coffee I've been trying to look at is from farmer mill to the roasters, where that system is. And I think the direct trade between the farmer, the mill to the roaster is actually making a significant change in those what we call field miles or product miles. I don't have any of the numbers project that. Of course, I'm growing coffee in Southern California, which is a high-income region and consumer region, and that has an obvious advantage. But we still have to figure the ways in which, on the traditional regions, how we get that more efficient. I think there's some machines that will help. I think Daniel Jones, who's speaking after this, has actually a pretty sophisticated technology that will help do this traceability technology to help everybody kind of start to see how it moves through the channels and start adding that value component to it, which will hopefully start changing the behaviors of how we view coffee and we buy it and consume it. So you're right on to think that it's these little aspects of this value chain that we have to attack. So.
So, and then the cost of shipping instant coffee and the carbon footprint, the drastic reduction in the carbon footprint of shipping instant coffee as opposed to shipping roasted coffee is phenomenal. To me, it's really incredible. The weight of a cup of coffee when it's in instant coffee form is a fraction of the weight of a cup of coffee when it's in whole bean form. So, you know, it's like grow your coffee in California, roast it really close, and then you can ship it anywhere you want in an instant coffee form for a fraction of the price, and the carbon footprint is drastically reduced. So at Sudden, what I think is most visible in terms of like sustainability and waste reduction is the reduction in polypropylene plastic waste that we were able to achieve when we switched to using compostable packaging. And that's what people can see right up front, and behind the scenes, what's made really invisible in any kind of food production and manufacturing is just like the massive amount of waste that goes into putting a product into a compostable package. There's like water waste, plastic waste, a huge energy consumption, and that for Sudden has been like a huge focus, is reducing that. In our first 2 years of business, we halved our water consumption through efficiency, through creating better systems for how we make our coffee. I developed a system for brewing our coffee that uses our water much more efficiently, so we're able to use much less water to brew the same amount of coffee. We reduced our energy consumption by 90%, and we reduced our plastic waste by 90%. It's stuff that all happens behind the scenes, and you can't look at our website and see like necessarily that we're an operationally we're an ops focused company, but we have like this incredible core competency around operational efficiency, because our CEO Josh, he worked for McKinsey. He was a McKinsey consultant. He's an industrial engineer, and I've learned so much from him, and that's enabled us to really like make such a huge impact on how our business works. So for me, coming from just specialty coffee world where that kind of stuff is really not focused on, like operational efficiency isn't like necessarily a huge focus for small coffee companies. It's mostly about like, we got to keep our doors open, you know? And just having that like marriage of the specialty coffee world and also like this really crazy operational efficiency has been phenomenal to learn from.
Yeah, I'd like to interject a good example of where your product has helped in energy efficiency. So when I go backpacking, I had this thing where I'd carry a little grinder, pour over set, filters, because it was just so rewarding to have a really nice cup of coffee up in the mountains of the Sierras. But then you're done brewing, you have the grounds, you have the filter, you have, 1.8 pounds of equipment. But with Sudden coffee, it's like, boil the water, put it in, you can have the enjoyable cup of coffee without carrying stuff and having the waste. And so it's kind of a really a great example of how efficient you can get for quality coffee. So I just wanted to interject that in.
Yeah, I can totally second that. I'm a really ardent backpacker, and I always take Sudden. So.
Mutual Admiration Society
Yeah.
up here. It's just sweet.
I think you already go REI.
I also just want to say I'm equally obsessed with what you both do.
This is a great love fest.
Oh,
Yeah.
And Meister's podcast?
oh, stop it, everybody.
Okay.
Come
Go.
back.
Just saying.
back.
All
Come back.
right.
Okay.
Best friends forever. You're watching it happen here on stage.
I wanted to raise a different kind of waste. At Bellwether, like the whole waste reduction thing is super front and center for us. It's very visible for us because we don't have an exhaust stack, and CO2 and other and long chain hydrocarbons are even worse in terms of carbon footprint. Like we cut that out, so that's like obvious. But there's this other kind of waste that we endure and that we allow to happen in our industry, which is the waste of human potential. And I ran production facilities for a long time. That was sort of that was the heart of my career thus far. And I've watched really talented, really dedicated people fall prey to repetitive stress injuries or back injuries because a lot of the ways that we do business were invented in like the 50s and 60s. And if you roast on like on an old UG22 and you don't have a pneumatic loader or a bucket loader, you're climbing up on a step ladder with a 40-pound bucket of coffee 20, 25 times a day and doing this, which is like not a super ergonomic gesture. And I know people, friends of mine, who were not able to continue with their chosen profession of coffee roasting because they were injured by that activity. And one of the many things that we want to do here is really take what we thought was the most crucial part and the most valuable part of coffee roasting and preserve that while stripping out some of the things that were maybe wasteful of people. And that was sort of the physical injury aspect of it. So you don't need to do that to roast on one of our roasters. There are no exposed belts. You don't really even know how to need to know how to maintain it. We can take care of that for you. What you need to do is you need to have a passion for and a desire to roast coffee, right? And if you have that, we've provided what we think is like the greatest tool ever for that. If you wanted to work out, totally, there are tons of CrossFit gyms where you can do those things and gain that physical strength. But we thought that maybe it was time, again, to sort of take this thing that we love so much. I think about coffee really as communication. You're communicating this aesthetic experience to somebody, and we wanted to preserve that activity while bringing it into the 21st century, or even just the late 20th century.
Yeah, I think that human potential is another thing that I see for all three of you, right? Basically, like Umeko, you're eliminating the need for any of the sort of ideological or cultural barriers that people have about specialty coffee, and have the potential to reach an audience that wouldn't otherwise feel like this was a product for them, because suddenly it's the easiest thing in the world. It's as easy as making Crystal Light, actually. That still exists. But I think that potential to just get to people. And with roasting as well, the idea that anyone could roast. We're wasting this potential by keeping people out of the industry, by telling them that they don't have the skills, by telling them that they don't have the physical capacity to do a job that we can change to make it so that everyone has the physical capacity to do it. And I think, Jay, the work that you're doing as well, diversifying the crops that someone can grow and increasing their potential as farmers by offering them an alternative that is economically viable and that can create a totally new market for them. That's capturing what would be a potential loss or a potential just zero, and really, if you'll pardon it, planting something where nothing was growing before. So I think that for me, innovation is a combination of these things, right? Accessibility, waste reduction in all of these different ways, and then just improvement in general. So, this is a really magical, I don't know, I'm having a great time. I don't know about you. This has been fantastic for me. So I have one last question that's kind of a big one, but I don't want you to overthink it. And I basically want you to sort of think in the spirit of innovation, outside of the work that you're doing. I want to know something else in coffee that you see as being something that is almost untouchable, or is a tradition that we hold really, really dear, that you would like someone else, maybe because you're busy, to radically re-engineer or redesign. And it could be anything. It could be a particular brewer, anything that comes to mind. Don't think about it too much.
Like a specific piece of
technology? Anything that you think is so revered in specialty coffee that we think we just need to start innovating. Someone needs to think about critically.
I don't think people revere it, but I think that packaging is the number one thing for me. We, gold standard for sustainability is a paper bag with a PLA liner that then has associated with it very, very costly supply chains to get the coffee there while it's fresh. I think we all know it, right?
I worked in cafes for a really long time, for a decade, and there's a lot of waste that's baked into how cafes operate. When you're making coffee, it's by definition going to be wasteful. When you brew an air pot of coffee, the water that you use, a good percentage of it is retained in the coffee bed, and you just throw it away. So there's that, but also there's You rinse your group head every time you pull a shot. You rinse your filter every time you want to brew a pour over. You are constantly using all of this water. There's so much coffee waste. And I think also just like in a competition, for example, there's so much coffee waste involved in that. When you're wanting, I competed for the first and I think probably the last time last year, and I was like, oh my God, I'm wasting all of this coffee. And then I'm going up and telling these judges how much I like respect this coffee, and I just threw out so much of it, just practicing, And I just think there's so many centers of waste that we don't really think about because we feel like it's necessary in the service of presenting quality. And I think that you absolutely can have quality, beautiful, brilliant, clear quality, and reduce your waste by a lot. So I think the concept that I would like to examine more and sort of see us start to dismantle is the idea that efficiency and quality are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, woo.
So the question was that what innovation out there in the coffee world I would like to see that maybe not obtainable? Is that, I don't know.
Can or cannot be obtainable, whatever.
I have this problem because I think everything is obtainable with technology and brain power and group brain power. But I just want to see if you save 10 cents on packaging and shipping, that goes all the way back to the farmer. If the farmer can get paid better so that they can get paid better for their crops so they can take care of the families better, now put nutrition on, now get better plant material, provide disease-free plants because they're better nutrition. And I think there's an interesting result when the producer gets paid better. And that would be a fascinating case study to see if we can make those changes. And I know there's these systems in place that will make it very difficult. So that would be the single goal for me.
Yeah, I just wanted to build off of that. I think that sort of like in order to achieve that, the innovation, and in order to achieve many of the goals that we heard about yesterday, the innovation that we need most is one of culture. And we need to examine the culture that we have built and decide what about it is worthy of being carried forward, and what about it is more worthy of critique. Because we are supported by our culture that we have built, we're buoyed by it, we're protected by it a little bit, and we're also hamstrung by it. And it's a self-inflicted wound a little bit these days. So, I would agree with many of the speakers yesterday that it's time for us to take a cold, hard look at ourselves.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you so much. This has been a really, I'm really charged up by this conversation, and I hope that this has been inspiring for a lot of folks in the audience. I just want to say thank you again to the three of you, and everybody, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. That was great. And now you're dismissed. Just a little clearer. Well, just to sort of wrap up this particular session on innovation, I personally, this is about me because I'm the one with the microphone standing on stage right now, I definitely feel like a lot of what we sort of talked about, and everyone who was on stage, everyone who was involved in this, and even just the energy in the room, felt really synergistic. And I feel like it's really important for us to think, while we're thinking about these innovations and while we're thinking about the work that everyone's doing to make coffee better, to remember that we are sort of all kind of in it together. There is a sense, I think that the specialty coffee industry is funny in a lot of ways, and one of them is this sort of fraternal feeling that we have when we all come together, and sort of even just describing what I was doing this weekend to people who aren't in coffee, and they're like, it sounds like a family reunion. So yeah, it sort of is that way. And there, of course, is competition and some competitiveness and some degree of tension in what we do, because we all are very passionate about the work that we're doing and the industry that we're in. But I do also think that ultimately, we're all sort of in this together with the idea of making better coffee and making coffee better. And innovation, obviously, is the thing that we're all pushing toward. It is the cornerstone of our industry. And so I want to thank everyone who is sitting through the session today, who came and was captivated and interested. I want to thank everyone who got up on this stage and spoke about the work that they're doing. I want to thank them also for offering challenges for us and putting out there into the world the things that we should be working on next. So where will we go next? For a coffee break, that's where we'll go, actually, right outside. But thank you all so much for this session. I really appreciate it.